familiar face at the desk also, and I welcome all the families of our witnesses and thank them for being here this morning. As I've said many times, we face an axis of aggressors that deepen their cooperation every day. A new cooperative engagement between our enemies strengthens every day. We need qualified people who are willing to step up and serve during these dangerous times. Matthew Lohmeyer has served our country as an active duty officer in the Air Force and Space Force. Based on his experience in uniform, he's been an outspoken proponent of eliminating the divisive DEI agenda that was the hallmark of the Department of Defense in the earlier administration. Fortunately, President Trump and Secretary Hexpeth have done much toward removing DEI at DOD. Mr. Lohmeyer's nomination for Undersecretary of the Air Force represents an opportunity to evaluate closely the kind of leadership we need in the Air Force and Space Force at this pivotal moment. This role requires a steady, unifying presence and needs someone who can work across the department to advance readiness, morale, and mission focus. I look forward to hearing how Mr. Lohmeyer intends to be that needed presence. Mr. Justin Overbaugh has been nominated to be the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. In this role, he would serve as the Principal Assistant to the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, overseeing the intelligence, counterintelligence, security, and law enforcement functions of the DoD. Mr. Overbaugh's deep experience as an Army officer in the fields of intelligence and special operations make him ideal for a candidate of this position. I look forward to hearing his priorities for ensuring our defense intelligence enterprise is the best postured to provide timely and accurate intelligence to our warfighters, safeguard DoD's sensitive information from our adversaries, and inform our acquisitions and investments. Mr. Daniel Zimmerman has been nominated to be the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. In this role, he would serve as the principal advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and the lead policy advisor to all matters related to Europe, NATO, and Russia. Mr. Zimmerman will have responsibility for managing the NATO alliance and countering Russian aggression and malign activities. His background as an intelligence officer and his experience working in Congress make him an ideal candidate for this position. I look forward to hearing his priorities and how he plans to revitalize the NATO alliance and develop initiatives to counter Russian aggression. With that, I turn to my friend and colleague, Ranking Member Reed.
Well, thank you very much. On my microphone. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to recognize Mr. Lohmeyer, Mr. Overbaugh, and Mr. Zimmerman, and also our colleague, Senator Bill Hagerty. We also want to recognize the families that are here today. Now, Mr. Lohmeyer, you've been nominated to be the Undersecretary for the Department of the Air Force. If confirmed, you would run the day-to-day operations of the Department of the Air Force and assist the Secretary in leading the largest fleet of aircraft and space assets in the world. Most importantly, you would be responsible for managing the hundreds of thousands of men and women who make up the Air Force and Space Force. Mr. Lohmeyer, I must confess I have deep concerns about your ability to represent these men and women. While I appreciate your past military service, your record of troubling conduct in uniform, extreme partisanship, and animosity towards military members with whom you disagree politically is, in my view, disqualifying to be the Undersecretary. We must acknowledge your record of behavior and statements. In 2021, while you were an active duty Space Force Lieutenant Colonel in command of a large formation, you self-published a book titled Irresistible Revolution, Marxism's Goal of Conquest and the Unmaking of the American Military. The book argues that Marxism is rampant within the ranks and is leading to the collapse of our military and our society. As you wrote, and I'll quote, "To be perfectly clear, the path we're on as a country leads to fratricidal and genocidal warfare." While still on active duty and command, you went on a far-right podcast which was known for spreading misinformation and conspiracy theories to advertise your book. All this is done without knowledge or approval of the Department of Defense. You were immediately relieved of command when your book and podcast were discovered. After leaving the Space Force, you have continued to write and speak extensively about Marxism in the military. You appeared on dozens of podcasts and panels and made hundreds of social media posts about this specific issue. As you write in your book, Irresistible Revolution, I quote, "In one respect, U.S. military service members are no different than members of the People's Liberation Army. Each is composed of humans who share a common nature. Because we share the same nature, what Marxist ideology does to the Chinese military service members, it will do to the American." Mr. Lohmeyer, I've read much of your writing, and frankly, I would question your interpretation of Marxism. Nonetheless, I would make one point clear. I'm concerned that you have a misguided opinion of American military service members and their leaders. If confirmed, you would lead an organization that, like the country it represents, is composed of Republicans, Democrats, independents, men and women of all races, creeds, and sexualities, yet your language suggests that you regard many of these men and women as adversaries to be rooted out and purged from the force. I would ask that you explain why service members and civilians who do not share your political opinions can trust that they will not be targeted under your tenure. Just as importantly, I hope you will pledge not to seek retribution against any military members or civilians with whom you have disagreed and publicly criticized in the past, especially as many of them would serve under you, if confirmed. I hope you will address these issues thoroughly and truthfully during your testimony. The Department of the Air Force faces enormous challenges in the years ahead. I want to ask for your views on how you will address them. Mr. Overbaugh, you have been nominated to be Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. If confirmed, you would serve as a principal intelligence advisor to the Secretary of Defense and would oversee the defense intelligence enterprise. Your experience in the special operations and intelligence communities would serve you well in this role. Among many issues you would oversee is the complicated network of defense intelligence agencies. These agencies, DIA, NRO, NSA, and others, continue to face challenges in efficiently coordinating intelligence among themselves and providing adequate resources to joint all-domain military operations. Such operations require split-second targeting support, and I would like to know how you would ensure their success. Mr. Zimmerman, you have been nominated to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. If confirmed, you would be the principal advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and the Secretary of Defense on international securities that relate to Europe, Russia, the Middle East, Africa, and the Western Hemisphere. I would note your experience as a career CIA officer with expertise in several of these regions. If confirmed, one of your challenges would be to ensure we continue to have cooperation and support from partners and allies in Europe and the Middle East. And I'm deeply concerned about the administration's comments and actions regarding NATO and Ukraine. As the administration continues to expand its large campaign against the Houthis in Yemen, it would be more important than ever that we have reliable friends abroad to assist us in other areas. Mrs. Zimmerman, I would like to know your plans for balancing U.S. long-term international security objectives against short-term demands. Thanks again to our nominees. I look forward to your testimonies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Reed. And I now have the pleasure of recognizing our colleague, Senator Hagerty, who I understand will be introducing Mr. Zimmerman this morning. So I now turn to you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Wicker, and I want to thank you as well, Ranking Member Reed. And to all my esteemed colleagues here, thank you for holding this hearing today. And importantly, to all of the very capable staff that are sitting behind you, because I hope you'll look at Mr. Zimmerman and the position that he's in today and realize that he was amongst your ranks. And he's sitting here today, and I hope that many of you will take this as an inspiration. It's my honor today to introduce my good friend Daniel Zimmerman, President Trump's nominee to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. Daniel is tailor-made for this role. For nearly 2 decades, Daniel has served with distinction at the Central Intelligence Agency, the White House, and most recently right here in the United States Senate. While many of the details of his career remain classified, I can share a few anecdotes that highlight his experience and his expertise. Daniel has risked his life in war zones, working with special operations forces out of Soviet-era bunkers in Iraq to hunt ISIS and other terrorists. He's dealt face-to-face with Russian energy oligarchs and traveled the world, from Europe to the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific, all on sensitive matters that are related to energy and trade security. And Daniel was one of the first people whom the White House hired to support the historic Abraham Accords, which is one of President Trump's signature achievements from his first term and is still bearing fruit in the Middle East today. For the last 15 months, I've had the great pleasure of having Daniel on my Senate staff. He's been a detailee who served with distinction. During this time, I've found that his tremendous leadership skills, his knowledge of global issues, are matched only by his humility and his character. He's been a wonderful colleague and a friend. Daniel's the right person to serve as the next Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, and I urge the members of this committee to move quickly on his nomination. Thank you all for taking him into account this morning.
Thank you very much, Senator Hagerty, and you're free to stay, but I'm sure your schedule is quite busy. So,
Mr. Chair, I think a number of us were hoping to cross-examine Senator Hagerty before he departs.
5 minutes each for the first round. Only because it's a Thursday. We'll skip that today. Thank you. We will now begin with opening statements, and we'll go in the order of Lohmeyer, Overbaugh, and Zimmerman. Mr. Lohmeyer, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, and members of this committee for considering my nomination to be Undersecretary of the Department of the Air Force. I'm grateful for the opportunity and for the trust of President Trump. To the many troops, men and women, both uniformed and civilian, who have expressed overwhelming support for me, thank you. To those listening who have served or who presently serve, you have my gratitude. I wish to acknowledge and thank my friends and family for their support, some of whom are here today, including my parents. I'd especially like to acknowledge and thank my wife, Sarah, who is here. What a blessing it is for a man who personally cares deeply about the Air Force core values of integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do, to live with a wife who likewise believes in and embodies those values. Furthermore, she, more than anyone else, knows that I strive to be a man of integrity and that I hope to inspire others to live in that same spirit. The Undersecretary of the Air Force is, by law, the Chief Management Officer of the Department of the Air Force. My breadth of experience serving in both the Air and Space Forces makes me uniquely qualified for the job at this pivotal time in American history, a time in which we face very serious threats to our national security. Even before receiving my commission, while still a cadet at the United States Air Force Academy 20 years ago, I began to become aware of the threats we face when I participated in a special exchange program to China that we no longer have. The United States government sent a small contingent of Mandarin-speaking Air Force cadets to the People's Liberation Army Air Force Academy in Changchun, China. It's north of North Korea. For a brief cold stint in March of 2005, I lived in the dorms with PLAF cadets, attended their classes, even aeronautical engineering, did PT with those cadets in the snow, ate in their chow hall, and was wittingly placed on a losing basketball team so that they could film our crushing defeat in front of their entire cadet body, no doubt for distribution in state media. Most U.S. Air Force Academy cadets know what I mean when I say there's no better view of the Air Force Academy than in the rearview mirror. But after spending time at the Chinese Air Force Academy, returning to USAFA was a treat. Later, after graduating and receiving a commission from the Air Force Academy, I finished pilot training and became a T-38 instructor pilot, where I taught future fighter pilots for both the United States and our foreign mission partners. I then flew F-15Cs out of Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan. That assignment served as yet another reminder to me of the threat posed by the PRC to our allies and our strategic partners, as well as to our own economic prosperity and military interests at home and abroad. I am keenly aware of that threat, and I understand the need for ready air and space forces, well-trained and equipped to meet the China challenge, to deter any aggression and, if needed, to defeat that aggression. Following my time in the cockpit, I transferred to what was then Air Force Space Command and provided strategic and theater missile warning for the United States and our allies. When the Space Force was subsequently created, I was entrusted with command of that same mission, leading a combined operation of U.S. and allied partners in control of our nation's $18 billion space-based missile warning architecture. I share that background to make this point. I speak the language of both the Air Force and the Space Force. I am air-minded and space-minded. I understand the necessity of United States superiority in both of those warfighting domains. Space in particular is a strategic domain. It is a theater where we pursue many objectives and where the United States must prevail. Space is necessarily also an operational domain because our ability to access and use space is a vital national interest. Despite my background, I've been startled by just how much has changed and developed technologically since I left active duty just shy of 4 years ago. My surprise is evidence of the dynamic and rapidly evolving threat environment mentioned here several weeks ago by Dr. Troy Mink. Combatant commanders are calling for more air and space power capacity, not less. I'm persuaded that if confirmed, I must be a strong advocate for a larger and better funded Department of the Air Force. Every single national security option the President needs is underpinned by air and space power. The President has nominated me for this important position with the trust that I will be a driving force behind a culture of integrity in the Department of the Air Force. This includes eliminating all unnecessary distractions and enabling military members to focus on their mission. Secretary Hegseth has said his priorities include restoring the warrior ethos and a focus on warfighting, rebuilding the military, and reestablishing deterrence. I am firmly aligned with those priorities, and there are unique ways in which they must be accomplished in the air and space forces. If confirmed, all of my efforts will be nested within that framework. Thank you, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you very, very much. Mr. Overbaugh.
Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the chance to appear before you today and for your consideration of my nomination to be Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. I am honored and grateful for this opportunity to serve our great nation. I am truly humbled by the nomination and thankful to President Trump and Secretary Hegseth for placing their trust in me. Above all, I am profoundly grateful to God for his countless blessings and the unmerited grace and forgiveness he so generously offers through his Son, Jesus Christ. I am joined today by my precious wife of 21 years, Rebecca, and our 4 sons, Joshua, Benjamin, Gabriel, and Matthias, of whom we are so proud. We are also blessed to have a number of family, friends, and former teammates with us here today and watching online as well. Having their love and support means the world to me. If confirmed, I look forward to bringing over 25 years of intelligence and security experience to the role. Most recently, I served as Director of Intelligence for a Special Operations Joint Task Force supporting a new U.S. Special Operations Command organization focused on global coordination of unique capabilities against great power competitors. I collaborated extensively across the intelligence community, the interagency, and with foreign partners to address high-priority threats. Prior to that, I held leadership and staff positions in human intelligence, counterintelligence, and counterterrorism. In these roles, I led both military and civilian teammates in tactical and operational deployments to both Afghanistan and Iraq, and strategic assignments in Europe and the United States. I routinely informed Pentagon and combatant command decision-making regarding joint and multilateral sensitive intelligence operations, which I also personally coordinated with chiefs of station and foreign intelligence partners across Europe. These operations were instrumental in countering foreign influence and terror threats against the United States, our partners, and strengthening relationships with key allies and positioning our forces to deter and, if necessary, defeat our adversaries. If confirmed, along with supporting the priorities of Secretary Hegseth and Mr. Hansel, should he also be confirmed, I will advocate for the following areas of emphasis. I hope to lead the enterprise in strategic assessments that shape defense requirements, ensuring they are data-driven, actionable, and aligned with national security priorities. I believe that we do not have the resources to cover all threats simultaneously. Therefore, we must be deliberate and discerning about the capabilities we pursue to defend our nation and deter, or if necessary, defeat our adversaries. If confirmed, I would encourage the enterprise to reassess established analytical frameworks, fostering innovation and adaptive thinking to tackle dynamic threats. I believe the warrior ethos includes the courage and mental clarity required to challenge personal and institutional bias and overcome bureaucratic intransigence. Finally, I would drive the enterprise to prioritize actionable intelligence, providing clear insights to support decision-making from the platoon leader to the president. I believe intelligence professionals must be able to separate signals from noise in order to be value-added to the warfighter. Progress in these areas would improve decision support and security for the enterprise and the American people. This is desperately needed, as I sincerely believe we face some of the most daunting challenges in the history of our nation. Again, I thank you for your consideration, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Zimmerman.
Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of the Armed Services Committee, thank you for the chance to appear before you today to be considered for the role of Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. I am honored by the President's nomination and by his trust. I also thank Secretary Hegseth and Undersecretary Colby for their support. I'm humbled by Senator Hagerty's introduction and grateful for his leadership and example. Mr. Chairman, with permission, I'll briefly mention some priorities that, if confirmed, I would anticipate meriting my full attention from day one. The international security affairs role spans Europe, Russia, Ukraine, Eurasia, the Middle East, and Africa. These theaters present many issues of consequence, which must be addressed judiciously and in ways that fully support the Department's primary goals of securing the homeland and deterring China. In my view, doing this will require cultivating strong partnerships in these regions that further U.S. interests and encourage our allies urgently to embrace greater responsibility and burden sharing, which is both in their interest and ours. Resolutely addressing with allies persistent threats to our interests, such as those posed by Russia, Iran's potential to develop a nuclear weapon, and terrorism, and countering China's ability to project military power and influence in these theaters. All this can and should be done in a way that advances the President's and Secretary's America First, Peace Through Strength agenda. If confirmed, I would draw on almost 2 decades of national security experience in intelligence, in policy roles, and in the field, where I've had the privilege to work on many of the same issues and regions involved in this portfolio. The challenges are serious, yet familiar. Mr. Chairman, if I may introduce my family, my parents, David Zimmerman and Beth Zimmerman, are here, to whom I owe immeasurable gratitude. I would like to acknowledge my sister Tabitha Zimmerman and 3 brothers, Ethan Zimmerman, Luke Zimmerman, and Nick Zimmerman, who along with my dad have all served or are serving in our military. And along with their exemplary colleagues, they hold my deepest respect. My 4 brave children are here: Ransom Zimmerman, Anchor Zimmerman, Haven Zimmerman, and Liberty Zimmerman. I have asked them to behave unless I get asked a tough question. Most important, my wife, Chloe Zimmerman, is here, a constant friend without parallel who continues to transform my life. I'm grateful for many other family and friends attending or listening today, and I give thanks to my great shepherd, the Lord Jesus. Mr. Chairman, if confirmed to this role, I would apply myself with all the humility, vigor, and excellence our country expects and deserves to help preserve the inestimable blessings of liberty for us and for the next generation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks to all 3 of you. And again, welcome to the family and friends. We now move to standard questions, which are required of all civilian nominees. And so if you'll each turn your mics on and answer audibly. Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes.
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 Have you assumed any duties or taken any actions that would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
No.
No.
Exercising our legislative and oversight responsibilities makes it important that this committee, its subcommittees, and other appropriate committees of Congress receive testimony, briefings, reports, records, and other information from the executive branch on a timely basis. Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify before this committee when requested?
Yes.
Do you agree to provide records, documents, and electronic communications in a timely manner when requested by this committee, its subcommittees, or other appropriate committees of Congress, and to consult with the requester regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such records?
Yes.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established by this committee for the production of reports, records, and other information, including timely responding to hearing questions for the record?
Yes.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes.
And will those witnesses and briefers be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And now we will move to questions by individual members of the committee, and I'll begin. First, for each of you, much of the funding in the reconciliation bill, which is being put together now in House and Senate, because of our rules, has to be unspecific and will technically be at the discretion of the Department of Defense, though we will write recommendations for them. A quick yes or no from each of you, and begin with Mr. Lohmeyer. Do you commit to follow unequivocally the Congress's spending recommendation in defense reconciliation?
Yes, Chairman.
Mr. Overbaugh?
Yes, Chairman Wicker.
Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And then let's move then to Mr. Zimmerman. In your prepared testimony, you mentioned burden sharing. Let's talk about NATO. In the first Trump term, the president demanded that all NATO allies meet their burden sharing obligations. Do you think the NATO members took this challenge seriously? It seems that they are reversing nearly 2 decades of decline. Do you believe this spending marks a renewed commitment on the part of our NATO allies to burden sharing, Mr. Zimmerman?
Senator, thank you for the question. NATO is a very important alliance that U.S. commitments there are grave and serious. I do think there's general consensus that the alliance has to adapt. You mentioned very appropriately in your opening remarks a threat environment where our adversaries are colluding and collaborating even more and more, underscoring the need for strong alliances and partnerships and greater burden sharing. I think there is reason to be encouraged by actions that some NATO members have taken to take greater ownership of their security needs and be alliance partners. I think the administration has identified a need, an urgent need, for that process to accelerate.
Okay, and one other thing, and I'm glad to hear you come down strongly on behalf of our participation in this very important NATO alliance. As far as I know, we do not yet have a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, DASD, for NATO. Will you commit to filling this position at the earliest opportunity?
Senator, to the extent I can manage that, I commit.
Okay, and do you agree it would be very important for that to be filled based on your earlier testimony?
Senator, the NATO alliance is a very important alliance.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me go back to Mr. Lohmeyer. And let me choose my words here. As the Department of the Air Force makes major basing decisions, currently including platforms and mission sets like F-15EX, KC-46, and Space Control, and very soon, the future CCA. and the F-47 support infrastructure. Many of us on the committee remain concerned about the consistency, fairness, and transparency of the process. Mr. Lohmeyer, are you aware that in the FY25 NDAA, which was passed by the Congress and signed into law by the President, we prohibited programmatic basing decisions or programmatic sole source basing decisions? Are you aware of that?
Yes, Senator.
And if confirmed, will you commit to upholding this law?
Yes, Senator, I am committed to upholding the law in every respect if I'm confirmed.
Okay, well, and let me just say, how you do this is going to be very important. There are strategic imperatives and objective criteria that should be paramount rather than political considerations. And frankly, I'm going to say this, after the politicization of the Space Command headquarters basing decision, do you think we've got some confidence rebuilding to do? And what specifically will you do to restore confidence that this is being called according to statute and called by the numbers?
Well, I think it's very important, Senator, that, and I share your concern, that we eliminate the politics of the decision-making process. The service secretaries and the undersecretaries should work very carefully to make data-driven decisions and decisions that will most benefit the warfighter and our strategic posturing around the globe. And so you have my commitment, if confirmed, that we'll do our very best to make sure those decisions are based on the needs of those capabilities in various locations and strategy, not based on politics.
Thank you very much. How's your Mandarin?
Hi, how?
Did you get that, Madam Clerk? Thank you very much. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lohmeyer, you posted the following on your X account on October 19th, 2024. If we are fortunate enough to see a Trump presidency once again, then there will be serious consequences for those senior leaders who have broken their oath, betrayed the trust of the American people, and participated in the hyper-politicization of the uniformed services. And let me tell you about one such officer who still serves. Ms. Lohmeyer, what did you mean by serious consequences for these officers, many who are still serving and would be serving in the Air Force?
Thank you for bringing this up, Senator. I share your concern for and commitment to ensuring that we've got a relatively apolitical military workplace. It was one of the driving, motivating factors prior to my separation from service in the fall of 2021 for the things that I wrote and spoke about. I was never publicly critical of my chain of command. I was never publicly critical of my senior leaders while I served in the uniform of my country. As you mentioned, that post was put on X in my private capacity as a private citizen in 2024. I've been out of uniform for the past 4 years nearly, and have rather enjoyed my ability to speak freely and express a full range of the expression of my ideas on platforms such as X. However, I'm very committed, and if confirmed, very committed to making sure that we eliminate political distractions from the military workplace. Our service members and the American people truly deserve the opportunity to serve in a nonpartisan military workplace. And what I meant by the statement was that I believe that a Trump presidency or a Trump administration would take accountability very seriously. We wouldn't overlook that kind of partisan politicization of the military workplace that I believed we had experienced in the past years.
Do you commit then to not take any action against any individual, military or civilian, who carried out DOD policy and regulations or implemented any laws enacted by Congress?
Senator, I think I heard all of the question. I missed probably part of it, but the tenor was that asking of me a commitment to not hold certain leaders accountable who were following the law or implementing policy. And in that vein or that spirit or in principle, I'm only interested in holding people accountable who don't follow the law and who don't honor their oath to the Constitution, which I take very seriously. Again, I'm very interested in nonpartisanship from our uniform wearers in particular, and giving the right to the American people to entertain their partisan arguments. But I have no vindictive spirit. I'm not interested in retribution, but I am interested, if confirmed, in looking forward and making sure we have proper accountability and high standards in the Department of the Air Force.
Then you disavow the statement you made in October 2024 saying if Trump takes over, there will be consequences for people. And most of the consequences, I assume, would be targeted at people who you were had differences with because of their support of the policies, including equity and other policies. Is that true? Or you were just making up all the stuff in your posts in the last several years?
Well, Senator, I'd love to look at the context of all of the statements that I've made, but I will make just one point that as I've considered and contemplated the path to confirmation or through the confirmation process, which I've taken very seriously, I very much had in mind the social media presence, podcast appearances, media appearances I've had for 4 years, and I've left every last jot and tittle of that up online and available because I'm very deliberate in what I choose to say. I believe in what I say, and I also reserve the right to be wrong about things and to change my opinion about things. But I have nothing to hide. I try and speak what I believe to be true, and I'm happy to be corrected about things in which I'm mistaken. But in principle, what I was intending to say in that post was that I believe accountability matters, and that's the spirit of what I was trying to get at. And if confirmed, I'd look forward to ensuring we've got a culture of accountability in the Department of the Air Force. That was not intended to be retroactive or retributional in nature, but simply intended to communicate that leaders who prioritize accountability and high standards will do the American people and service members a service by committing to that.
Well, I think we all want to see leaders who are accountable themselves and also the highest standards. But those standards have to be consistent with this country and the servicemen and women who serve. And they come from, as I indicated, many races, many nationalities, different views, politically or otherwise. And the goal is, as you indicated, is an apolitical military force. Everything in that I've read in your book and everything else is far from apolitical. You've targeted individuals that you felt had, for political reasons, unfortunate views. And if you carry that attitude into your job, you'll cause great confusion in the Air Force and great animosity within the ranks, fear, et cetera. So thank you for your previous service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Or Senator Cotton, are you in charge?
Mr. Overbaugh, I see the intelligence and security shop in the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, not just through my work on this committee, but my work on the as chairman of the Intelligence Committee as well. INS should be the central advocate for the DoD's intelligence priorities and the central orchestrator to ensure that all defense intelligence agencies are meeting DoD needs. Yet it has often seemed to me that all the agencies under the INS umbrella appear to largely act on their own accord. Oftentimes it seems with little direct oversight. Can you commit to working with me on this committee and on the Intelligence Committee to ensure that we improve INS's enterprise governance to meet the to make sure that the defense intelligence agencies are providing the intelligence that all of our warfighters need?
Yes, Senator, I absolutely can.
Thank you. Do you share that assessment, that it seems like oftentimes they're kind of all going off in their own direction?
Senator, I share your concerns in that regard, and what I can commit to you is, if confirmed for this position, I would place an emphasis on ensuring that the entire defense and intelligence and security enterprise remains responsive, particularly to combatant commanders and the warfighters, to ensure that they're well positioned to deal with global threats.
Thank you. I believe that part of the issue here is that INS is not optimally organized to meet that role of guiding the defense intelligence enterprise and advocating for defense intelligence priorities. I put report language in last year's NDAA that mandated a GAO review of the authorities, the roles, and the responsibility of INS. Can you commit to using the findings of that review to inform any potential organizational changes that might be made in INS?
Yes, Senator, and as I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm particularly concerned about bureaucratic intransigence, and so analyzing the structure and process within the organization would be a key focus if I'm confirmed.
Thank you. as is often the case, while boxes and lines on a chart are important, they're not the only thing to consider. Sometimes it's not the most important thing that needs change. Sometimes it is leadership and culture. INS was dual-hatted as the Director of Defense Intelligence and the principal director or advisor to the Director of National Intelligence because Congress recognized the urgent need for a single proponent to ensure the broader national intelligence community meets defense requirements. Yet, I don't think there's any documented processes or procedures for ensuring that collaboration between INS and the ODNI, and I think the past interactions between ODNI and INS have not been adequate. Can you commit to working with Mr. Hansel to make sure INS is collaborating closely and productively and constructively with the ODNI?
I absolutely can, Senator, and this is something that Mr. Hansel and I have already had an opportunity to talk about. I share his passion, and I know that if we're confirmed, we look very much forward to working with ODNI Gabbard and the rest of her team to ensure that that lash-up takes place.
Thank you. And to be clear, the work that the defense intelligence agencies produce, I think is stellar and top-notch. It's often some of the best intelligence reporting I see on this committee, and especially on the Intelligence Committee. We want to make sure that we're providing proper guidance for all those agencies underneath your orbit, and also that they're having their proper influence within the broader intelligence community, especially claims on resources. Mr. Lohmeyer, the Air Force has been underfunded for a long time, especially in the last two Democratic administrations. That's led to a dramatically smaller fighter force than we've had at any time since World War II. Yet we need air superiority and given the broad range of threats we face. Do you commit to working with the administration and with Congress to be ensure that we increase resources going forward for the Air Force and Space Force?
Yes, Senator, I commit to that.
And you agree that we need those additional resources?
I do agree.
Thank you. Part of the problem we've had, too, is a shortage of pilots, 1,800 pilot shortage across the total force as of fiscal year 24. Retention is only averaging about 40 to 50%. Do you agree that we need to focus very intently on both recruiting and retaining pilots?
Yes, Senator, and this is a problem we've had for many years. It transcends administrations, and I know that Air Force leaders and administrations have tried to fix this problem. We try and throw money at the problem sometimes, and I think that that tends, frankly, to keep in those who are already probably on the fence and want to stay in anyway. But I talk to many pilots. They're interested in fixing their quality of life and quality of service concerns as well. And you have my commitment to try and solve these problems.
The work I've done on this committee with Senator King suggests the same. They're always welcome the money, but they don't join the Air Force, the Space Force, for a couple $1,000s more a month. They join it because they want to fly high-performance aircraft in defense of our nation. One final question. The Ebbing Air National Guard Base in Arkansas is home to a growing international fighter training mission. We have 48 F-35 scheduled to be located at Ebbing over the next 3 years. The Air Force has worked with Senator Bozeman and Congressman Womack and I very well over the years to get this critical mission bedded down. I assume you agree that foreign military sales training remains a vital Air Force mission?
I do, Senator.
Thank you. And if confirmed, we can count on you to continue to ensure that the Air Force supports the mission at Ebbing and has the resources necessary to train our allies?
Yes, Senator, you have my commitment that I'll work very closely with Dr. Mink if he's confirmed, and also be very transparent in my comms with you about the situation in your state.
Thank you.
Yep.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your past service to the country and for your willingness to continue to serve, and welcome to all your families. On Tuesday, Secretary Hegseth announced by tweet that he was ending implementation of Women, Peace, and Security at DOD, claiming it was a Biden-era DEI policy. Unfortunately, he missed the fact that President Trump and members of his current administration, including Secretary Rubio, Mike Waltz, and Secretary Noem, all worked on this policy in 2017, and President Trump signed it. U.S. combat units began using female engagement teams during operations in Iraq and Afghanistan to gather intelligence and build trust with local communities. Years later, because of the success of those efforts, we enshrined this concept into law as part of the WPS Act. Since that time, WPS has been used by the warfighters to identify victims of human trafficking and joint exercises on non-combatant evacuations, to provide human intelligence on violent extremist groups like ISIS and al-Shabaab, and to understand the human terrain to improve kinetic and non-kinetic targeting. I'm very concerned that taking away these tools does not make us a stronger or more lethal fighting force, and in fact, it takes away some of the options we have to be successful. Secretary Hegseth also claims that warfighters hate it, and yet the newly confirmed chairman of the Joint Chiefs not only told this committee about WPS's operational value, but he was very clear that this is not DEI. Lawfare made public in an article last night a memo from the director of the Joint Staff providing their best military advice to the Secretary. And this is a direct quote from that article. Mr. Chairman, I would ask that the article be introduced into the record. Without objection. The article points out from that memo, and I quote, China and Russia have no equivalent of WPS, and that, end quote, and that the combatant commands 80 engagements with partners over the next 2 years under the program, quote, counter China by gaining access to a population China largely ignores. The director continues that WPS, quote, prevents radicalization by violent extremist organizations and disrupts the smuggling of narcotics, weapons, and humans into the United States. Officials from every combatant command and from several other military components concurred with this recommendation from the Joint Chiefs. And this is information that's not new to this committee. Every four-star combatant commander has told us about the strategic advantage that WPS provides to our forward deployed forces. So, Mr. Zimmerman, you're nominated to oversee regional security for Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Western Hemisphere. Don't you need all the tools that are available to counter violent extremism in Africa and the Middle East? That's a question.
Senator, thank you very much for the question. The violent extremism, counterterrorism problem is a major concern, and if confirmed to this role, one that I will be focused on. It does require, in my view, a whole of government type of approach, and sometimes we can be too siloed as a government. In my background in the intelligence community, I've had the opportunity to work with many other interagency partners and see the value that comes from across our government. And if confirmed to the role, I would, of course, make a priority to work with all the tools and coordinate to make sure all the tools are available.
Thank you. That argues in my mind for the importance of the WPS effort. Mr. Overbaugh, you're nominated to oversee intelligence functions for the Department of Defense. Again, if confirmed, I assume that you would like all tools available to gather human intelligence on the ground, especially in a conflict scenario.
Every single one I can get, Senator.
Thank you. And Mr. Lohmeyer, you're nominated to be Undersecretary of the Air Force. If confirmed, I assume your forward deployed airmen will want to understand everything they can about the human terrain before taking strikes like on Houthis targets in Yemen. Would you agree?
I would agree with that, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you very much. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, to all of you, thank you for your offer of additional service to our country. Mr. Overbaugh, how would you recommend addressing the evolving threats posed by near-peer adversaries in the domains of cyber, artificial intelligence, and space? It would appear to me that right now there is an overarching challenge from multiple near-peer adversaries with regard not just to air, land, and sea, but space and cyberspace. The areas that you will be overseeing include both cyberspace and really space, coordinated. Talk to us a little bit about how you see your role in terms of coordinating our response to those adversaries.
Senator, thank you for the question. We've already had a little bit of experience dealing particularly with the soft space cyber triad. And it's a critical effort because as we continue to push into new domains to meet adversarial threats across the globe, we have to stitch those domains together in a way that achieves combined effects for the warfighter and in defense of the American people. As it relates to cyber threats that you mentioned, I am concerned about the threats to our critical infrastructure, the disinformation that can come through cyber threats, and also zero-day exploits. And I think some of our solutions in zero trust architecture, active cyber defense, private-public collaboration, and offensive cyber capabilities are tools that we'd be able to bring to bear to meet those threats. And space threats, the presence of ever increasingly sophisticated ASAT weapons, particularly interested in space-based surveillance of our enemies, as well as jamming and spoofing are of significant concern to me. And so I would look to advocate from the position that I'm being nominated, resilience and redundancy in our constellations, as well as ensuring complete space domain awareness and encouraging commercial partnerships to ensure that we're able to meet those threats effectively.
One of the items, Senator Cotton started on this line of questioning a little bit, and I want to pursue a little bit more. There clearly are stovepipes, some intended, some unintended, with regard to the sharing of information between Title 10 and Title 50 participants. But you've also added another item in, which is also critical, and that is the private sector as well, which adds additional challenges. Could you talk about what your role is in terms of making sure that appropriate information is shared and that we make the most out of the information that we do gather?
Senator, I believe that the Defense Intelligence and Security Enterprise has a role in ensuring that we identify the threats accurately so that both public and private entities can work effectively to design solutions to deal with those threats, as opposed to coming up with solutions that don't match up with the threats that we face.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman, look, I've got just one real quick question for you, and that is basically right now we've got the possibility, if we have an adversary, one of our near-peer adversaries, confronting us in one theater, there's a very, very high probability that we'll have a second near-peer adversary confronting us in another theater. How do you see your role in terms of coordinating with our partners to make sure that we have the best advantages to be able to deal with two threats in two different theaters?
Senator, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this just for a moment. I think the threat that you've articulated is one that requires utmost attention and underscores the relevance of this administration's emphasis on partnering with allies and for them to take greater ownership and take seriously their need to boost defense spending. If confirmed to the role, one of the principal aspects of the job, as I understand it, is to manage defense relations in the area of responsibility. And so if confirmed, I would do all I can to partner effectively with allies and partners to ensure that their security capabilities are at a level where we can have the right posture to address the threat you're describing. So partnerships are extremely important, and if confirmed to the role, I would take that seriously.
Thank you. Mr. Lohmeyer, the B-21 Raider coming online shortly, probably one of the best and finest of the major projects out there, on time, on budget. Currently, we're coordinated to have about 100 of them in. Clearly, that's not going to be enough. Would you seriously consider any requests out there to increase the number of B-21s that could be acquired by the Air Force as the needs arise?
As Senator, this issue is also very important to me. One of my priorities is going to be modernizing the nuclear enterprise. And of course, the B-21 is an important piece to that. And I understand that 100 B-21 program of record discussion to be rather maybe a floor, and I'm very open to discussing more.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask each of you to respond very quickly to the following two initial questions that I ask of all of the nominees on any of the committees on which I sit. This goes to fitness to serve. And we'll start with Mr. Lohmeyer. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No.
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 Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement relating to this kind of conduct?
No.
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 Before I get to my questions for Mr. Lomar, let me be clear. Mr. Lomar, you were fired, removed from command for going on a partisan podcast and pushing political conspiracy theories while in uniform. Since leaving active duty, you have spread divisive, harmful views on race, equality, LGBTQ rights, and talked openly about seeking retribution against those you perceived did you wrong. Exactly the kinds of comments that undermine the unity and professionalism of that our military depends on. And as if that wasn't bad enough, you're also a January 6th conspiracy theorist, calling it a, quote, government-led false flag and hoax at the Capitol. I have deep concerns about your nomination to be Undersecretary of the Air Force, and just as much concern about what this nomination says to the members of our military. I'm very glad that Senator Shaheen asked questions relating to, by the way, that this is a comment to all of you about the importance of WPS. And I'm glad that she pointed out that this is a very useful tool that neither Russia nor China have to combat extremism. And to me, you know, this is yet another example of the obsession that this administration has against a whole swath of programs and efforts that this administration deems DEI. So I'll get to my questions. Mr. Lomar, I hope you can answer these questions, yes or no. Do you believe the January 6th attack on the Capitol, it was a, quote, government-led false flag operation?
Senator, let me begin by respectfully saying that I believe you've mischaracterized me and my views. Now, that said,
excuse me, could you just respond to whether or not you believe that January 6th attack was a government-led false flag operation? If you no longer believe that, just tell me.
I have never said exactly what you've just attributed to me, but I will answer your question, Senator. I believe that it's evident that there were, in fact, undercover government agents at the Capitol on January 6th, but I have not said exactly what you've said. I'm
as
always
far
very
as I
careful
know,
with the way I
okay,
characterize things.
Excuse me. My time is running out. You deny saying it. Do you believe the January 6th attack on the Capitol was a hoax?
I've never used the word hoax, I believe, to characterize the event, but what I have just stated, I do believe, which is that there were most certainly...
Excuse me, again, you deny saying that. Oh, are you planning to reprise against, I know that Senator Reid asked you some questions, but I want to actually name names. Are you planning to reprise against General Whiting, Major General Pepper, Colonel Fran, or any other active military service member for perceived slights against you?
Senator, as I've said previously in the hearing, I'm very focused on moving forward in the future and making sure that I hold people accountable for their obedience
actually, that's why I'm asking
following
you the
of law.
question. So let me ask you this. If confirmed, will you recuse yourself from initiating or being involved in any administrative or personnel actions involving General Whiting, General Pepper, and Colonel Fran? Yes or no?
I know two
Will
of
you
the,
recuse yourself?
Senator, I know two of the individuals you've mentioned. One of them is a combatant commander who I presume has the trust and respect of the President of the United States.
Could you just respond to my question, please? I know you're taking up my time.
Senator,
will you recuse yourself against in any actions that relate to these people that I just mentioned?
Senator, what I will commit to is that I will treat all people fairly according to the law, and I'll try and do my best, my job to the best of my duty if I'm confirmed.
That is totally not reassuring. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have other questions for this nominee for the record.
We'll have other rounds. Mr. Lohmeyer, you were beginning to say what you do believe about January the 6th. So go ahead and finish that thought if you...
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Senator. What I was saying is that I believe there were many Americans who were gathered that day as part of a protest. And I also think it's been politically fraught for many years, and it continues to be brought up because there's so much uncertainty about what was really going on. Totally outside of my lane as a nominee for the Undersecretary of the Air Force. And if confirmed, it's my job is to organize, train, and equip forces to provide to combatant commanders in the Air and Space Forces. And that's what I'd be focused on.
Okay, Senator Rono, in light of my intervention, do you have any follow-up question at this point? Oh, okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
My comment is that his refusal to answer very clearly the questions that does not reassure me at all that he is qualified to take this position.
Thank you, ma'am. Senator Ernst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of our witnesses for being here today and for continuing your service to these great United States of America. I do want to start, Mr. Lohmeyer, we'll start and talk about an issue that is extremely important to me and to all of Iowa, and that is about our Air National Guard refueling wing located in Sioux City, Iowa. When the National Guard's 185th Air Refueling Wing in Sioux City was converted from the F-16 fighters to the KC-135 tankers back in 2003, the Air Force said it would upgrade the airfield at the Iowa National Guard facility. Again, this is 22 years ago. This is an important issue. It is one I have pushed with the Air Force for a number of years now, so this line of questioning should be no surprise. Because the tankers they do have heavier airframes, they have greater fuel loads that they will be delivering. The runway is unable to hold that load. Okay, so this is critical importance. Unfortunately, the Air Force and the National Guard never followed through on their promise to upgrade that runway. They failed in their commitment to complete the runway upgrade. So I am additionally concerned with this failure because now we have a conversion of the 135s to the KC-46s. And the 185th Air Refueling Squadron could potentially lose its mission because of the failure to upgrade this runway. It will directly impact the retention of the immense talent of these guardsmen in Sioux City. And this is completely unacceptable, and the Air Force must live up to its commitment as of 22 years ago. So, Mr. Lohmeyer, is the Air National Guard a vital component of the Air Force?
Yes, Senator, it is.
Is it essential that the Air National Guard has the infrastructure and resources necessary to execute its missions effectively?
Yes, every time the Guard comes up, Senator, I often reflect on the fact that when I was an F-15C fighter pilot, I never even knew what unit happened to be providing fuel to me on the tanker in front of me. There's such a seamless integration between our active duty, reserve, and Guard personnel, and so I think this is a very important issue.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. If confirmed, do I have your commitment unequivocally that you will fully fund the runway upgrade at the Iowa National Guard facility in Sioux City and ensure it's at the top of the Air National Guard MILCON priorities for the fiscal year 26 NDAA?
Well, Senator, like you, I don't like it when people make commitments and can't keep them. I think it's important to the trust of the American people, and it's important for the Air Force to keep its commitments. So I'm familiar with the history that you've laid out. And unlike perhaps those that have gone before, I'll commit a little bit differently to you that I will be very transparent in my communications with you. I will take this particular issue very seriously, and I want to make sure that if I make commitments to you or to the American people that I'll be able to follow through, or the Department of the Air Force will be able to follow through. So I'll take that very seriously.
That is disappointing, though, Mr. Lohmeyer. I think I heard a commitment to Senator Cotton about his home state priority. I am asking for a commitment for my home state priority. The very mission of this unit relies upon an upgrade of its runway. So this is very problematic for me. I have been bringing this up with the Air Force for years now. I am asking that a commitment be honored for our Iowa Air National Guard. and the community that supports this National Guard unit. So given the lack of commitment around this project and its direct impact on the 185th's ability to perform its mission, I want to make sure we're not putting the cart before the horse. So again, Mr. Lohmeyer, I'll give you a second chance here. Can I at least have your commitment that you will work with the Secretary of the Air Force to pause any discussion on changing the 185th Air Refueling Wing's mission set?
Senator, yes, you have my commitment that I will, if confirmed, work very closely with Dr. Mink, if he's confirmed, to carefully make data-driven decisions, consider all variables. I don't think these are decisions that should ever be taken lightly. I certainly don't like that we can't follow through with commitments that we've made. So I make the same commitment to you that I've made to Senator Cotton, or that I'd be willing to make with any senator in this room, that I'll weigh each matter in a non-political manner, try and make the best decisions for the force. And of course, I'm very interested, Senator, as you've suggested, in honoring the commitments that the Department of the Air Force has made in the past, where that's feasible. And I'd look forward to learning more about that.
Thank you, Mr. Lohmeyer. And I want to be clear, this isn't just about the runway. It's about whether our Air National Guard is treated as an equal partner, as you stated earlier, in our national defense, or as an afterthought. And unfortunately, they have been treated as an afterthought. The Iowa's 185th has served with honor, and they absolutely deserve infrastructure that matches their operational demands. I'm going to continue to press on this, and I hope that I have resolution in the near future. We need to make sure these commitments are honored. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses, congratulations for your nominations. There's a beautiful phrase in the New Testament in both the Gospels of Luke and Matthew that goes something like this: from the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. And Mr. Lohmeyer, I want to ask you about your very active mouth and what it reveals about your heart. Your tweeting. I'll just give you a few examples. August 9, 2024, the left lies about nearly everything it does, and tens of millions of Americans believe the lies. So trashing the left and calling tens of millions of Americans dupes. August 2nd, 2024, if today you're wondering why the left and Mitt Romney seem to have entirely lost any semblance of a moral compass, Vladimir Lenin provides you the answer. April 1, 2023, of all that is good and decent, the left is the real oppressor. But the one I want to ask you about is the one that Senator Hirono asked you about, and she read you an excerpt. I'll read the whole thing. A tweet from August 9, 2024. Picked this up in my base exchange at Buckley Air Force Base several weeks after J6. This is what the Biden-Harris administration ushered in. After a government-led false flag and hoax at the Capitol, they immediately demonized the men and women in uniform. Then they purged conservatives and Christians with their shot mandates. Brilliant planning, actually. Tell me what the phrase that you wrote, government-led false flag and hoax at the Capitol, what does that mean with reference to January 6th?
Thanks for bringing this up again, Senator. I like the verses that you've read. I agree that it matters a great deal that we try and speak truthfully. I'll remind you respectfully that the comments that I made that you've just shared were shared on my X account, I presume, while I was a private citizen in this country. In 2024, I'd been out of uniform for 3 years, and in fact, with absolutely no intention of returning to public service, I was quite enjoying private life and being able to criticize people as I wish.
So they were a sincere reflection of what you had in your heart at the time you wrote them?
Well, in as much as those statements were properly contextualized, and I can't speak to the context from which you've read, I always do try and speak honestly, and again, reserve the right to be wrong about any of my views. But
how about just the phrase? What does, with respect to January 6th, what does your phrase, a government-led false flag and hoax at the Capitol, mean?
Let me share, too, that while I do recognize the other quotes that you've read, I don't recall having written those words that you've just read about January 6th. And so that could be partly a memory problem. It could be that I retweeted something and that quote has been pulled, but I don't recall using that phrase. What I do believe is that private citizens in this country can have the right to express their views as mean or as wrong as they might be, and that the men and women in uniform defend the right of the private citizen to speak those views, and that my concern while I was in uniform was, in fact, that the kind of partisan rhetoric that I had used, that you've just quoted from, for example, was actually being inserted into the military workplace in a way that divides troops. And so I was trying to hold our military cultural and workplace environment accountable to a standard of nonpartisanship, as I've indicated, so that we could thrive in unity and not division. Now, private citizens have the right to say those things.
I completely agree. Private citizens have the right to say and believe whatever they want. This is a hearing about your qualifications for the position. The qualifications are essentially, in my view, a mixture of three things: background, character, and judgment. It's about judgment. I don't want to confirm somebody into the Pentagon who would fall for a conspiracy theory that a fourth grader would find incredible. If I searched your social media and I saw you praising the Great Pumpkin over and over again, you would have the right to have that view, but I wouldn't want somebody who believed in the Great Pumpkin to be in the position that you're nominated for. And so if I'm thinking about people in the military, I know Virginia has an awful lot of people in the military. One of my kids is in the military. There are people in the military who are left, right, center, and maybe even more who are completely disinterested in politics, and we got to praise those. But how would somebody who's in the left or considers themselves in the left serving in the Air Force, when you say the left lies about nearly everything it does, of all that is good and decent, the left is the real oppressor? How would any person who identifies that way feel any confidence that you as a leader would have their back?
Yes, Senator. I think it's a great question. It's one I actually share your concern for and care greatly about. Let me just share briefly in a 10-second answer that at the time that I departed from active duty, I had young men and women in uniform of all racial or ethnic backgrounds, certainly different political backgrounds, coming to me privately, sending me notes and saying, "Sir, I never knew what your political worldview was. I don't understand completely why you've chosen to now take a stand for these issues or write about what you did, but I respect you as a leader."
All right.
And if confirmed, I'd be happy to come
my
back.
time has run over, but I'll just, in yielding back to the chairman, I don't know where you were on January 6th. Most of us were here. A lot of us had a friend, a guy named Howie Liebengood, who was a Capitol police officer who died as a result of January 6th, whose widow, Serena, is one of my constituents. When I hear somebody, anybody, talk about what happened here as a false flag or a hoax, it is insulting to those of us who are here, and it's particularly insulting to those who lost loved ones that day. I yield back.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lomer, I'm going to cover kind of the topics that you and I talked about in my office a couple days ago. First of all, I like to ask nominees, maybe I'll ask all of you. Billy Mitchell was testifying in front of the, I think it was Senate Armed Services Committee, the father of the U.S. Air Force in the mid-1930s. He was talking about a certain place in the world. He called it the most strategic place on the planet, and whoever controlled that place would control the world. Mr. Lomer, I'll start with you as a Air Force guy. You know where Billy Mitchell was talking about?
I do, Senator.
What place was he talking about?
It was the state of Alaska.
Great. Can I get that confirmation from the two other witnesses?
Yes, Senator, you can.
Most strategic place
Alaska.
in the world? Great. Good. You guys are starting out really well here. Thank you. And our adversaries also see it as quite strategic. This is a depiction of the Russian and Chinese incursions into our ADIZ and into our EEZ in the last 2.5 years. I'm going to flip that over and show you the numbers. It's like several. That's in the last 2.5 years. Pretty remarkable. Doesn't make a lot of news in the lower 48. In our airspace, northern airspace. And the green ones are depictions of joint strategic bomber task forces and joint Russia-Chinese naval incursions. So they're doing joint ops in the northern Pacific and Alaska, okay? Just a couple, 2 weeks ago. So, Mr. Lomer, you're a former F-15 pilot. can put the other slide up. When you do an intercept mission, say from Alaska, how tough are those missions? Our guys do them all the time. Every one of those incursions, we intercepted them with F-22s, F-16s, F-35s. How tough of a mission if you're flying from J-Bear or Eielson Air Force Base out to the Adas here? Is that a tough mission?
Yeah, Senator, the seat in the F-15 and even in our newest fighters isn't comfortable when you're spending hours in there hitting the tanker multiple times.
So you're hitting a tanker probably 4 or 5 times just to go do the intercept, correct?
Correct.
And sometimes in the middle of the night in February, you're doing an intercept up there, Chuck Cheesy. If you're in a single-engine F-16 intercepting Russian Bear bombers in the middle of the night in February, and you got to punch out, you lose an engine, how likely are you going to survive in that?
Senator, those are incredibly high-risk missions, and we've got great men and women who put their necks on the line every day doing just exactly what you've described, and especially if you're having to punch out in that environment, you're not in good position.
No. So what the NORTHCOM commander and the INDOPACOM commander and even the CNO of the Navy has said, we need more infrastructure up here to support these missions, because they keep saying, the Russians and Chinese are going to keep doing this even more. So would you work with me in this committee on those goals? We're looking at ADAC as a Navy base with 2 8,000-foot airstrips. We're looking at a hangar up at Utiavik, that's Barrow, to be able to station search and rescue operations, or Galena, that was a former Air Force base. Would you work with me in this committee on looking at that kind of infrastructure that can support the men and women in Alaska who are literally on the front lines of great power competition doing these kind of missions? You know, just a couple of weeks ago, hard missions. Our military up in Alaska do such a great job, but can you support me in this committee and working on those infrastructure projects that the 2 combatant commanders in this region, INDOPACOM and NORTHCOM, have testified that they need?
Yes, Senator, I share your interest in this area. This is, in many respects, a cornerstone of our projection of power into the Indo-Pacific theater, and you have my commitment to work very closely with you on what the Secretary and I are trying to do from a basing perspective and infrastructure perspective in the Department of the Air Force, if confirmed.
And let me ask one final question. The Secretary in his the Secretary nominee in his testimony also committed to me, the Air Force is committed to me in this committee for about 8 or 9 years now, to get more tankers up at Eielson. The last Secretary of the Air Force did, the previous Secretary of the Air Force did, Democrats, Republicans. Can you commit to me, as the Secretary just did, to work to get the 4 KC-135s that they've been promising these brave men and women who need tanking capacity to go do these intercepts, real-world missions? Can you work with me and commit to me to getting those 4 KC-135s up to Eielson?
Maybe a compliment.
Senator, I'll work, if confirmed, I commit to you that I will work to ensure that the commitments that Dr. Mink has made are fulfilled.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lohmeyer, the role of Undersecretary of the Air Force is not a platform for ideology or grievance. It's a demanding leadership position that's responsible for overseeing a budget, personnel, institutional integrity. It requires a strategic vision and, really importantly, managerial experience. That is to say, hands-on experience managing a major organization. I'm at a loss to see what in your background qualifies you to lead or actually run the Air Force when you've never led an organization that approaches this one at anything like the scale and scope of what you would be expected to do if you're confirmed.
Senator, thanks for the opportunity to address that. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I've Spent time in both the Air Force and the Space Force. I was trusted with to be an aircraft commander on the $50 million F-15C air-to-air superiority fighter, and then later was placed in command of our $18 billion space-based architecture a decade ago. And in fact, that was my first foray into working with program managers, acquisition experts, and budget.
What is the largest number of people under your direct responsibility that you...
Senator, at the time that I finished my career, I was a squadron commander, and we had just over 100 people in our unit.
100?
That's right.
And how many will you be responsible for if you're confirmed?
The Department of the Air Force is approximately 700,000 active duty Guard and Reserve and civilian personnel.
So 100 versus 700,000. How long were you in charge of that squadron?
I was a squadron commander for 1 year, Senator.
1 year. Is that the standard length of time?
It is not.
Why was it shorter?
Senator, it was cut short when I was relieved of my command for publishing a book that's been mentioned in this hearing that was advocating for a return to an apolitical military workplace instead of dividing troops along political ideological lines.
So this is very strikingly reminiscent of what we've heard before in these confirmation hearings, seemingly for the Secretary of Defense, who also in effect was relieved of his responsibility when he was running a veterans organization and in effect ran it into the ground, which should have been a warning for all of us, as it was for me and others on the committee, about lack of managerial experience being potentially a really grave pitfall. And I'm very fearful that we're going to see the same in others in the Department of Defense. There's no room for managerial misguidance or mistakes. Again, let me ask you, what in your experience qualifies you for this job?
Thank you. I agree with you and share your concern. We have no room at this critical time with the threats that we face for our service secretaries and our undersecretaries to mismanage, to break the law, to not take the priorities of an administration seriously. And in fact, we need real leaders in place to make hard decisions about budgets and acquisition processes, major defense programs. We need them to make hard decisions about the nuclear modernization efforts that we have underway. And if confirmed, I'll take that very seriously. I'm a fast learner, and I'll surround myself with experts, including Dr. Mink, if he's confirmed, to try and solve those problems for the Department of the Air Force.
Would you use Signal?
I do use Signal, Senator.
To talk to others in the Department of Defense or the national security establishment about the plans for pilots in the Air Force to do military missions?
Senator, one of the things I've become quite good at over my 15-and-a-half-year career in the Air Force and Space Force is understanding very well that there are sensitive and classified materials that should only be discussed in appropriate platforms, and we have appropriate platforms and media for those communications.
So the answer is no.
Signal is an unclassified messaging app, just like other apps, although it's end-to-end encrypted. And so if confirmed, that's something you need to take very seriously in those roles. Yes, Senator.
Is your answer no?
My answer is that
Would not
I will use
Signal.
I will abide by the law, and I will make sure that any sensitive or classified communications are accomplished on the appropriate mediums.
But this is a yes or no answer. You would not use Signal, I assume, from your answer. Yes or no?
I will use Signal for private discussions that are unclassified with friends or colleagues, as I always have.
So you would not use it to discuss missions that pilots in the Air Force, you're going to be
Correct.
Undersecretary of the Air Force,
Yes,
if you're confirmed.
easy commitment, Senator.
Would be flying in hostile territory, such as those pilots were when the Secretary of Defense used Signal on 2 occasions to communicate about those highly sensitive, confidential, potentially dangerous missions, putting pilots at risk. You wouldn't do it, correct?
Senator, you have my commitment. I will not use Signal to discuss those things.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, first off, congratulations on your nominations. Your jobs are going to be exciting. It's going to be it's an exciting time to be part of building and making sure we have a great military. So you're all three going to do a great job. So I didn't know I was supposed to come and ask for a military base in my state, but I've got one that's important, Homestead. But anyway, I just got back from Europe, and this has been consistent since I've been up here. As I talk to allies, they complain about two things that are trying to buy our equipment. They complain about the foreign military sales process to get approval from the government. Then they complain about they can't get the equipment quickly because our defense contractors are not on time. So, Mr. Zimmer, can you talk about what you think we can do and what you plan on doing to make it easier to make a decision? Because we were just in Denmark, Finland, and Estonia. The two that we had the conversation with all three of them, but a lot of it they don't understand when they're our ally and they can't get an answer. No is an answer. I'm a business guy. What frustrates me about the government is just give me a stupid answer, because if you tell them no, then they can go to Israel, they can go to South Korea, they can go to other places and buy some of the equipment they need. But if it's just a black hole, that doesn't make any sense.
Senator, from my understanding from the issue, I think I share your frustration and understand why allies have thoughts about the process. If confirmed to the role, I understand that the way in which I would be connected to the FMS process is an advising role, and particularly looking at prioritization. In both with our European allies and here, we are in a situation dealing with an underinvestment in the defense industrial base over the last several years that has limited the supply of what they need. So that's a challenge, but I would give my best advice, if confirmed, to the Secretary and Undersecretary about how to prioritize allied security needs through the FMS system.
So you might not be involved in this, but it's my understanding that we, with our defense contractors, we pay for them to develop a product, and then they own the IP for that product. Is that true? Or do you know?
Senator, I don't know the answer to that. I would like to get back to you about that.
Does that make sense? Just off the top of your head, did that make much sense? If we pay for it, if our government pays for it with our taxpayer dollars, and they own the IP?
It sounds like, if true, it might be one of the challenges in the program.
Yeah. So what do you think we can do to get our defense contractors to fulfill the obligations that they've committed to? Because we hear this from our allies all over the world, that our defense contractors are not meeting, not just with their commitments to us on time, but commitments to our allies for equipment that they need to make sure they can defend, which is exactly what President Trump wants them to do, to be able to defend themselves first.
Senator, it's a great question, and if confirmed, I would do all that I could within the scope of the ISA portfolio and how it touches on FMS to ensure that the process is as painless and seamless as possible. It is very important for our allies and for the administration's goal of burden sharing to have an efficient FMS process.
Okay, thanks. You all three are going to do a great job. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator King is next, and he has graciously yielded to Senator Kelly. So, Senator Kelly, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator King. Mr. Lohmeyer, you recently made a post that seemed to indicate Russia was justified in its invasion of Ukraine because Russia feared NATO expansion. This isn't just untrue, it's also the exact kind of misinformation that Russia pushed to justify them rolling troops and tanks across the border into Ukraine and bombing Ukrainian cities. So, Mr. Lohmeyer, I want to be very direct here. In your opinion, was Russia justified in its invasion of Ukraine?
Thanks, Senator Kelly, for taking the time to meet with me a week and a half ago. In answer to your question, I'll say as directly back as I can as well, and in respect, I don't believe I used the word justified in my post. However, I am a bit of a historian. I like context, and what I've always said publicly is that all heads of state have to make determinations for their own security. And so when I say something like that, whether it's with Vladimir Putin or any head of state, I'm saying that they are entitled to make those decisions whether we agree with them or not. Now, it's a bit outside of the lane of the Undersecretary of the Air Force, of course, whose role as a Chief Management Officer will be to organize, train, and equip forces for the fight for any given administration to meet combatant commander needs.
Well, I'll give you that the post did not say that, but you did post a article by John Mearsheimer that said why the Ukraine crisis is the West's fault. You did not say that was your opinion. So I'm going to ask you the question again. In your opinion, was Russia justified in its invasion of Ukraine?
For context, which always, of course, Senator, as you're aware, matters a great deal, that was an article that was written by John Mearsheimer, an international relations scholar, in 2014, and it was a comment about Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and some of the history leading up to that. It was not an article that had any bearing upon what happened in the decade that followed, per se, but it was an international relations academic piece that talked about the annexation of Crimea. And his opinion in that article, and this is a very insightful article, in fact, traces through the history of NATO expansion since it was created. It's, again, an academic piece. It's something that we study at strategy school.
Crimea was part of Ukraine. In my view, still is part of Ukraine.
Yes, Senator, and the point I just make in bringing that up is that the opinion that was shared in that post about that article had to do with past conflict and implications for the ways in which allies interact on the world stage and how that influences the decisions that heads of state make. It was not in any way intended to excuse the behavior of any head of state, including President Putin.
So now I've got two questions. So the title of the paper was Why the Ukraine Crisis is the West's Fault. Do you agree with that premise?
It's an enticing title. Again, it was pertaining to decisions that were being made a decade prior to the conflict that you're asking about. It's an incredibly informative academic work that is based in international relations theory. I very much like the paper and would still recommend to people today, if they're interested in understanding the conflict in the region, it's a rich resource of information.
Do you agree that the Ukraine crisis is the West's fault?
No, because that's far too simplistic. Again, global politics is messy and complicated affairs. What I will say is that it's very clear. A couple of years ago, Russia invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine's been on the defensive trying to fight that war, and of course has had bipartisan support in this Congress.
So was Russia justified in invading Ukraine?
Senator, with respect, I've not said that.
Well, that's why I'm asking you the question.
I know you are, and I really, the reason I'm hesitating shouldn't be taken or interpreted to imply an answer one way or the other. I like context. I don't like yes and no's, and I don't like soundbite media. I'll say that I believe that heads of state retain the right to make decisions on who they'll go to war with. That's not something I decide. That's not something even the United States or its leaders get to decide, even as much as we want to weigh in on those positions. I can say, though, for certainty that
it sounds like you think it's okay for one of our adversaries to invade one of our allies.
I did not say that. What I will say is that I'm grateful that there are currently efforts underway by this administration to try and seek a peaceful resolution of that conflict. I think it's time that it end.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for willingness to serve. Mr. Zimmerman, since March 15th, CENTCOM forces have conducted a sustained campaign targeting the Houthi terrorist organization in Yemen to restore freedom of navigation and American deterrence. As of April 27th, CENTCOM has struck over 800 targets. These targets have killed hundreds of Houthi fighters and numerous Houthi leaders, including senior Houthi missile and UAV officials. Mr. Zimmerman, in your assessment, have U.S. operations against the Houthis been a success?
Senator, I support the administration's forcible approach toward the Houthis, beginning in the early days of the administration with the executive order that called for the elimination of the threat of the Houthis with allies and designating them as a foreign terrorist organization. I don't think I have access to the classified information that I would like to have to make an assessment about the efficacy of these strikes, but I support what the administration is trying to do.
Thank you. Mr. Overbaugh, one of the organizations you will help oversee if you are confirmed is the Missile and Space Intelligence Center, we call MISSIC, which is a component of DIA and located in my state of Huntsville, Alabama. MISSIC provides a world-class analysis on the performance of foreign weapon systems, which is critical to ensuring our warfighters dominate the battlefield against our adversaries. Mr. Overbaugh, are you familiar with MISSIC and MISSIC's analysis? And if so, can you talk a little bit about how important this mission is?
Senator, I am familiar with MISSIC and particularly their role in feeding quality intelligence into other entities like DIA to ensure that we have an accurate picture, threat picture. I think even more important is the potential for MISSIC to play a key role in ensuring we understand the adversarial threat as it relates to ensuring that our Golden Dome is as effective as it possibly can be.
Have you had the opportunity to visit MISSIC headquarters in Huntsville?
Huntsville, yes. MISSIC, no, not yet, Senator.
Thank you. Hope you get to soon. Thank you. Mr. Lohmeyer, you have an absolutely outstanding, unique career path as a respected military officer. Thank you for your service. You've got a breadth of experience in both the Air Force and Space Force, which is very uncommon, but none of those experiences were in managing large budgets. Why should you be trusted now with such a heavy responsibility at a time when we are taking physical responsibility more seriously, thank goodness, than ever before, and while there is a growing demand from the American people that we have a clean audit of the Defense Department?
Thanks, Senator. I'm glad I get to readdress this. While it's true that I don't personally have extensive experience with a large budget in an organization or acquisition experience, I have sound judgment. I've demonstrated it throughout my life. I'm a fast learner. Secretary Mink, if he's confirmed, has demonstrated that you can pass 16 or 17 clean audits at the National Reconnaissance Office. He'll be a phenomenal leader to work with on this problem in the Department of the Air Force. What I can say is that we've got exceptional professionals who have been trying administration after administration to solve our budget problems, our acquisition problems in the Department of the Air Force, and many of them have had extensive acquisition and budgeting experience, but that doesn't mean you're able to solve the problems well. And so if confirmed, what I can commit to this committee and to the American people is that I'm interested in making data-driven decisions. I'm interested in exercising keen judgment and discernment about these budget decisions and coming to the right decisions that I believe the American people will be grateful for and trust, and doing that in concert with Secretary Mink in support of the President's priorities and in support of the Secretary of Defense's priorities.
Thank you. And your knowledge will be very important moving into space. You have a lot of experience in that area. We look forward to working with you in that area because, as we know, it's going to be a much, much more important part of our military in the very near future. Thank you, gentlemen. Look forward to confirming you.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. I would mention to members a vote is going on the floor. I think we can possibly finish this hearing before that vote ends. Senator King.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lohmeyer, I deeply respect your career in the Air Force and the Space Force. But to follow up on Senator Tuberville's question, my concern is that the Air Force, and particularly your position, is going to be responsible for 2/3 of the modernization of the nuclear triad, and the Sentinel piece is looking like the most consequential civil works project that the Pentagon, or perhaps in this whole country, has ever undertaken. It's already in the Nunn-McCurdy breach. So I'm not satisfied with saying you're data-driven and you're going to hire good people. My concern is, I mean, you're the boss, and you would be if you're confirmed. And I'm just uncomfortable. I'm not talking about past tweets or books or anything else. I'm talking about the future, and that is the management of probably the most complex and important defense project that's ever been undertaken by the Pentagon. Try to reassure me. I mean, a great center fielder for the Red Sox is not necessarily qualified to be general manager. And your service is important, but we're talking about these critically important acquisitions projects that are intensely managerial. Try to reassure me if you can.
Thank you, Senator. I agree with your concern. I share your concern for the criticality of the Sentinel program, concern over the Nunn-McCurdy breach that's experienced. Modernization of the nuclear enterprise is, of course, a priority of mine. So here's the way in which I can try and reassure you, as I have throughout the rest of the hearing. I've been entrusted throughout my entire career with both leadership of men and women in uniform, as well as being entrusted with safeguarding and employing exceptionally exquisite and expensive weapon systems, both in the Air Force and the F-15C, and in the space-based infrared system, the space-based missile warning architecture, an $18 billion architecture. I've worked with acquirers, program managers in that process. This is not a question of whether or not someone has had the qualifications before to manage the Defense Department, because most human beings have never had that experience. In fact, this is a question of scale or scope, and I'll say that I've always been faithful to the trust that's been committed to me, even though the scale has been much smaller. And I'll say humbly that I believe I'm up to this challenge. I'm well qualified for this job. I'm air-minded and space-minded, and I understand very well the threats, especially that we face from our peer competitor in China. And so
thank you.
That's my best attempt to say, Senator, I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I'm also humbled by it and very concerned about it as well. And I look forward, if confirmed, to doing my utmost, very best to manage those very serious programs.
I appreciate that. Mr. Overbaugh, every time, and like Senator Cotton, I also serve on the Intelligence Committee. To me, the most important quality for any intelligence official is the willingness to tell the truth to the boss, even if it isn't what they want to hear. Dan Coates, former DNI, said the job of the intelligence community is to find the truth and tell the truth. Will you commit to me that you're willing to walk into the Oval Office or walk into the Office of the Secretary of Defense and say, this is the intelligence that we have about this particular problem that contradicts the policy desires of the President or the Secretary or the head of the Joint Chiefs?
Senator, I can absolutely commit to that, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that seeking the truth is one of the most important, if not the most important, components of an intelligence professional's job.
And if you look back on recent history, some of our real disasters have been caused by slanted or what I call cooked intelligence, and that's to be avoided. Simple question, did Russia start the war in Ukraine by invading?
Senator, it's a military fact that Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022.
There's one challenge about intelligence that we've learned, particularly in Afghanistan and then again in Ukraine, and that is the analysis of the will to fight of a population. We blew it in both cases. We overestimated the Afghans' will to fight and had the disaster of the end of that war. And then we underestimated the Ukrainians' will to fight, and all the intelligence was that the Russians would be in Kyiv in 2 weeks. I challenge you, and I know the department has done serious work on this, to pay attention to that, because that, for example, will be a factor in our policy decision about Taiwan. So it's not an easy question. It's not as easy as counting tanks from a satellite, but it's nonetheless an incredibly important intelligence challenge. So I hope that's something you'll pay some attention to.
Senator, I will, and I apologize. I see that we're over time, but I do want to address this, and I mentioned it in my opening statement about the importance of evaluating and questioning the assumptions that we use to make the assessments that we make, and examining the frameworks to determine how much they are maybe influenced by personal bias or bureaucratic bias, political influence, or any other type of interference which would inhibit our ability to provide our decision makers with the very best picture of adversarial threat, to include, which I personally think is one of the most important components of enemy capability, is will to fight.
Thank you. Find the truth and tell the truth. That's what we're looking for. Mr. Zimmerman, I'll submit some questions for the record.
Thank
for
you very
Thank
much, Senator Budd.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, congratulations to each of you. Thanks for the families and friends to be here today. Mr. Lohmeyer, are you familiar with the strategic basing process?
Somewhat, Senator.
Okay, great. Last month, the Department of Air Force transmitted its plan to Congress for the sustainment and recapitalization of the Air National Guard fighter fleet. Now, it was the result of much analysis and careful planning. It's this document right here. Have you had a chance to read this?
I have not, Senator.
Selfridge Air National Guard Base in Michigan, it's receiving 15 EXs, and that is not part of this plan, which I can guess will change things for the Air Force's frontline units, not the Guard units, but the frontline units. So, as an example, Seymour Johnson will have to train these A-10 pilots on the platform of the F-15 and the mission using their F-15E Strike Eagles. You flew the F-15, correct?
C models, yes, Senator, yep.
Well, that's a large unplanned increase in flying training compared to the simulator-based differences training for transitioning currently qualified F-15 pilots to the EX model. So I'm going to paraphrase a statement from the Air Force about the training capacity down at Seymour Johnson. F-15 program flying training requirements will jump by greater than 50% in fiscal year 27 and 28. And currently, the Air Force has no training-coded aircraft capacity to meet that requirement without reflow of combat-coded F-15Es. The Air Force is being forced to examine drastically cutting the F-15 syllabus length to meet those requirements. This creates risk on both quality and basic course aircrew graduates and on combat air forces that will receive aircrew with potentially subpar combat airmanship skills. And just to be clear, that statement was given by the Air Force in February, and that's before Selfridge basing decision was made. So if confirmed, what will you do to ensure that the 4th Fighter Wing at Seymour Johnson Base has what they need to make ends meet with this additional training requirement?
Senator, I'm really glad you brought all of this up. You have my attention. I understood everything you've said. It's of great interest. I'll say that I'm very familiar with the missions being flown out of Seymour Johnson. In fact, I'll just say publicly it matters a great deal to the Air Force and the American people that we had over 80 drones shot down in the Middle East this past year over a 6-month period by a unit out of Seymour Johnson. And we have dozens.
They had just arrived at that very moment.
They prevented potentially mass casualty events, and dozens of these men and women suit up every day out of Seymour Johnson doing an absolutely critical mission in defense of the homeland. And so you have my commitment that if confirmed, I'll look forward to working with Dr. Mink, if he's confirmed, to looking at these things in a nonpartisan way, these basing decisions and the proper force structure and bed down of forces. But I'm interested in learning more from you about Seymour Johnson in particular.
Thank you for that answer. And just to be clear, if confirmed, you'll be responsible for assisting the Secretary in organizing, training, and equipping the Air Force, correct?
Yes, thank you. And in fact, as we've mentioned, that's exactly what the role of the Undersecretary of the Air Force is, but that's our chief prerogative is organizing, training, and equipping air and space forces to provide to our combatant commanders.
Thank you for that. So if confirmed, I look forward to hearing the plan soon on how the Air Force is going to solve this issue and at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. Thank you all. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Budd. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lohmeyer, you know as well as I do from your military service that upholding good order and discipline is a foundation for our professional fighting force. Lethality relies on a honed practice of service members following lawful orders. I myself, even though as a progressive serving in the military, did not agree with President Bush's decision to look for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when we should have been destroying the Taliban in Afghanistan, still volunteered to go, and I'm proud of my service to this day. Sometimes service members have to serve against their own personal opinions. Circumventing commanders on the battlefield in real time could lead to life or death mistakes. As former Secretary of Defense Mattis wrote, officers must carry out a policy to the best of their ability, even when they might disagree with that policy. To that end, I have questions about your commitment to this core principle and the troubling signals that your confirmation would send to those in uniform. You claim to have only written your book and gone public after the Inspector General concluded that your complaint had no merit. But we all know that there are other channels available to service members concerned about commander decisions or policy choices beyond the IG. Before you chose to write your book or speak out in the media about policies that concerned you, did you consider being a whistleblower to your senators or representatives, which would have been protected under Title 10, Section 1034? Yes or no? Did you consider it?
Yes, Senator.
You did consider it. That is news to us. I ask that you present this committee any correspondence that you may have had with members of Congress.
Copy. I'll do that, Senator.
Thank you. Did you file an Article 138 complaint, which under the Uniform Code of Military Justice allows service members to seek redress for a wrong conducted by a commander?
I did not, Senator.
Okay. So why did you not?
There are many months in question, the time frame that we're talking about here, but at the time that we separated after I had been relieved of my command, and there was a command-directed investigation about me as well as the general officer that had relieved me of my command. It was a traumatic period, a period of hardship for my family and my children.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you were writing the book and you were still in uniform. You chose to write, you made the decision to write the book because you said there was no other way for you to address your concerns. And you said that you did reach out to members of Congress, which is news to me, but you did not file an Article 138 complaint prior to writing the book and speaking out
I
in
understand.
public.
I misunderstood your question, Senator. And my answer to your previous question, you asked if I had considered reaching out to members of Congress, and the answer to that question was yes.
Did you do it?
I had communication with members of Congress, and I'd be happy to provide that to you. I exhausted all of the means that I understood available to me. I'd been counseling with the base IG, Space Force IG, base legal, Pentagon Public Affairs, and the entire chain of command to include members of the Joint Chiefs before I published a book.
So nobody talked to you about Article 138 complaint, which is a recourse that you could have taken?
If that was discussed, specifically Article 138, I don't recall the circumstances as to why I chose what I did at that time regarding Article 138 specifically.
I'm concerned that you didn't follow through on all of the recourses that were available to you. You are allowed to have your personal views, but there are rules governing how public service members can be in opposition to lawful orders. With your actions, you signal to those under your command that it is okay to be insubordinate. As Peter Favor, a scholar who served in George W. Bush's National Security Council, has written, and I quote, "Military officers who believe that the policymaking process is heading in a bad direction have ample recourse to advise within the chain of command. If their advice is not heeded, the country would not be better served by senior officers provoking a civil-military crisis to advertise their policy differences with civilian leaders. You were relieved of command not for your beliefs, but for how you chose to express them on active duty while holding a position of authority over others. That is not persecution. That is accountability. And if, as a former commander, you cannot recount the basic recourses available to service members, how can we expect you to lead airmen and guardians? You were relieved of command not for your beliefs, but for how you chose to express them on active duty while holding a position of authority over others. So if it's true that you followed these steps, you still decided to circumvent the chain of command while still on active duty, to speak out publicly without informing your leadership. You could have resigned and spoken out or continued serving and kept your mouth shut, but instead you decided to continue serving and violate your professional ethics. You are allowed to have those personal views, but there are rules governing how public service members can be opposition to lawful orders. And so I sort of feel like you broke the rules. There are ways to do this, and you chose to instead circumvent those rules. That sets the standards for the people that you are about to take charge of to continue to circumvent the rules. And that is not conducive to good order and discipline within the military. Do you understand that? That is my concern.
If Chairman Wicker is okay with me responding, I'd be happy to.
Sure. I think the question is, do you understand that that's her point of view?
I understand your view, Senator. I think in value or in principle, you and I agree on many things that you've said. I will reject the idea that I did anything unlawful, unethical, or publicly contrary to, I never publicly criticized my chain of command. I never publicly was politically partisan while acting in an official capacity, and both of those allegations were the reasons I was relieved of my command, and I wasn't found guilty of either of those things.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Duckworth. I think the distinguished ranking member has a follow-up question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lohmeyer, earlier this year, it came to my attention that current serving military personnel have been receiving emails threatening them with being fired for supporting the current DOD policies. One email that was sent to a military officer with the subject line, "Clean House," states, quote, "With the incoming administration looking to remove disloyal, corrupt, traitorous liberal officers such as yourself, we will certainly be putting your name in onto the list of those personnel to be removed. We know you support the woke DEI policies and will ensure you never again influence anyone in the future. You and the redacted spouse's name will be lucky if you're able to correct your military retirement," end of quote. Mr. Lohmeyer, if you became aware of someone sending threatening emails to currently serving officers, what would you do in your capacity?
Well, Senator, I think the way in which leaders go about communicating with their troops matters a great deal. Having been in command, there's no way to retain the respect of your troops if you don't communicate respectfully to men and women of every background. I don't particularly appreciate the tone in which that email was written. I don't know who wrote it. I'm not familiar with the background of that email. But I will say once again that I share this committee's commitment to an apolitical military. I don't believe witch hunts are healthy in the military. I think that unity is our strength. I believe that when we start to go down the path of discussing partisan politics and ideology, it divides men and women. That's why the American people tend to be so divided. They have a full range of expression of these ideas. Our uniform wearers, to Senator Duckworth's point, ought to be focused on their mission and not being caught up in this kind of rhetoric. But if these kinds of things came to my attention, then of course they deserve attention. And every man and woman in uniform deserves to be treated with respect.
Do you believe it would be disqualifying for someone on active service in the military as an officer, listed, or civilian if they sent such an email?
Notionally, I think the context always matters, Senator, and I've expressed that I don't necessarily, I wouldn't write an email with that tone personally, and I'll speak for myself. What's qualifying and disqualifying at a very high level is whether or not people are acting ethically and legally, upholding their oath to defend and support the Constitution, and following the lawful orders of those that have been appointed over them to lead them. And that's what every enlisted and officer troop across every branch of the military is taught to believe in. It's that, hey, whatever baggage I bring to my service in uniform, politically, ideologically, I leave that at the doorstep. I get the same ugly haircut as those next to me. I wear the same uniform, bleed the same color, focus on the same mission, and we care about readiness and lethality.
Well, I too believe that context is important. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the context, particularly your comments since you were left the service, they created an impression of someone committed to, frankly, reprisal, revenge, weeding out from the service those people who do not ascribe to your thoughts. You've said it in so many words in your X filings and in your book. And I find it very difficult that suddenly you will have this transition, this enlightenment that will disabuse you of all those notions and make you someone who you claim today is apolitical, not concerned about the extracurricular activities of people in terms of their political positions, et cetera. That's totally inconsistent with what you've done over the last 4 years, and I think you've made that evident today.
Senator, am I allowed to respond?
Of course, that's the system here.
I'll say briefly that I really do believe, one, I believe that everyone who's been in this hearing understands that I'm authentic and try and be true in what I say. Second, I'll believe that every man and woman that's ever worked with me would be glad to welcome me back into public service.
Does that include the people that you've by name threatened to?
I've not by name threatened anybody, Senator.
Well, you certainly indicated your displeasure with lots of people by name.
Well, I'm displeased with the cowardly behavior of many people, but I've never threatened anybody. I think that we have many great men and women in uniform, high and low, who all have the right to try their best to serve this country faithfully, and I don't necessarily agree with all the decisions they make, but I'm not a vindictive person. I love all people, and I think that men and women in uniform will be very grateful to see me come back into service if I'm confirmed.
Well, thank you for your testimony, gentlemen. Mr. Overbaugh, I will have questions for Mr. Overbaugh and Mr. Zinnerman. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. This concludes today's hearing. I'd like to thank our witnesses for their testimony. And for the information of members, questions for the record will be due to the committee within 2 business days of the conclusion of this hearing, which is right now. We are adjourned.